Good evening. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Monday, Yom Sheni. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house on a Monday? Yehud in South Carolina, Steve, and in New Hampshire, Melissa and Great Neck, Paul in the Great Northwest, Guy in Ohio, Nancy, North Carolina, Sharon in New Jersey, Bella in Florida. Yes. And I'm glad you're here, Bella. Daryl in Oklahoma. Moshe in Brooklyn. Haim in Florida. Frank in San Pedro. Aoife in Florida. Alan in New York City. Riley. Shalom, watching from my hospital bed. May you have a complete healing. A refuah shlema. We say amen. And Ilanit in Silver Spring, and Joe in the Inland Empire, and Sharon in New Jersey. Tonight's episode of AT Daily is sponsored by our own Bella Rubin, in honor of my daughter Natalie on the 20th anniversary of her procedure. With endless gratitude to the donor's family, to the brilliant surgeon and his dedicated team, and to my amazing daughter whose courage and choice to live joyfully continue to inspire us all. Amen. May she live in great health and joy in living to 120, and may you live in great joy and health to 120 and beyond, Bella. And thank you for enabling us to share more Torah with more people around the world. And in the merit of that, may you and all your loved ones be showered in blessings, and we say amen. Okay, doubled off today. Continuing. This material is not easy. Not easy. Okay, so remembering, the sages were working this out later than when the temple was standing. It's like the Kohanim, the priests who served in the tabernacle and in the holy temple, I don't think that they had... I think most of these rulings square with what was actually done in the Holy Temple, but there were probably some nuances and subtleties that were only, realized and developed and passed into law after the time that the Second Temple was destroyed. The Kohanim probably just learned as a practical matter what to do from the Kohanim, senior to them who trained them. Nevertheless, this is an area, Zevachim, the offerings, where the sages really drill down because there were so many different kinds of offerings, because this was holiness of the highest order, but the Torah wasn't specific on certain elements of certain offerings, and so they had to derive that from the information that the Torah did give about other offerings, and always asking the question, can we extend this element of that law to this other kind of offering and this other kind of element and this other kind of ritual? And so they're just really drilling down, right? And also the idea of reading the entire Talmud from page 1 to page 2711, that's super recent, right? The Daf Yomi cycle has only been around since 1923. It's like, yesterday, last night in Jewish history. But the way the Gemara was studied is that people would go very deep into one area at a time. In this area, the sages went into it like they went into every area. But, it's not that so many people were studying this, right? They would more often focus on areas that had more practical significance, more spirituality, a little bit easier to derive life lessons from it. But, whenever we're in this kind of a corner and slogging our way through it, I think it's important for us to remember the passion that the sages had to work out all of these laws, because it is Torah and it must be learned, just like every other part of the Torah. So while it's easier to derive life lessons, from sections on the holidays or the prayers, even the laws of contracts and doing business, Nevertheless, this is as important as anything else, that we're going to do our duty as best as we can. Okay, Mishnah number 2 here in chapter 3. Our dafs tonight, double daf, pages 35 and 36. So Mishnah 2 begins about halfway down, a little less than about halfway down, page 35a. Mishnah 2 of chapter 3. In the case of one who slaughters an offering, okay, so slaughter doesn't have to be done by a priest, but slaughter is necessary. He can, if he has the wrong intent at the time of the slaughter, he can disqualify an offering. But which part of the offering process actually achieves the atonement or fulfills somebody's obligation after the blood is collected from the slaughter, conveyed to the altar, and sprinkled on the altar? That's really the effective moment. But then there's also parts of the procedure beyond the sprinkling, like pouring out the remainder of the blood on the base. And if there are portions that need to be eaten by the priests, eating those. If there are portions that need to be consumed by the altar, consuming those. Okay, in the case of one who slaughters an offering with the intent to eat beyond its designated time or outside its designated area, so beyond its time, that would render it pigul. And if you then violated the prohibition and ate of it, that's a karis-bearing penalty. If you are intending to eat it outside of its designated place, like a sin offering the parts that are eaten have to be eaten within the temple, that would also disqualify the offering, but would not render it pigul. Okay, we've learned that so far. So at the time of slaughter, he has intent to eat beyond the time or outside the place. But what kind of offering are we talking about? An item whose typical manner is such that one does not partake of it. So a burnt offering, which is consumed on the altar, people don't eat of it, and he's planning to eat beyond the regular time, beyond the designated time, of an offering that is not typically eaten at all. It's normally consumed by the altar, right? So for example, the portions of the offering that are consumed on the altar. Or he has intent to burn beyond its designated time or outside its designated area, an item whose typical manner is such that one does not burn it on the altar, i.e. the things that are eaten. In this case, the offering is fit, and Rabbi Eliezer deems it unfit. Right? So somebody's planning to eat that which is normally burned, it's not really going to be considered a significant action according to the majority, though it is by Rabbi Eliezer. The Mishnah continues, one who slaughters an offering with the intent to eat beyond its designated time or outside its designated area, an item whose typical manner is such that one does partake of it, sounds like it's going to be pigul, right, in case of time, or with intent to burn beyond its designated time or outside its designated area, an item whose typical manner is such that one does burn it on the altar, but his intent was to partake or to burn less than an olive bulk. So this normally would create pigul, or at least disqualify in the case of outside the place, but his intent is with respect to less than the minimum measure. So again, will not create a significant action that would render the offering unfit. And that's why the Mishnah says such an offering would remain fit. If his intent was to eat half an olive bulk and to burn half an olive bulk beyond its designated time or outside its designated area, the offering is also fit. Why? Because eating and burning do not join together. The Mishnah continues. In the case of one who slaughters an offering with the intent to eat beyond its designated time or outside its designated area, an olive bulk, minimum measure, an action that would otherwise render it unfit, but where is he getting that olive bulk from the animal? From the hide, or from the gravy, or from the spices that amass at the bottom of the pot together with small amounts of meat, or from a tendon in the neck, or from the bones, or from the tendons, or from the horns, or from the hooves. This is not the parts that we normally eat. Therefore, not a significant act of eating, and having such an intent would not render the offering unfit. Rather, the offering is fit, and one is not liable to receive kares for it neither due to the prohibition of pigul, if the sacrificial rites were performed with the intent to partake of the offering beyond its time, nor due to the prohibition of leftover meat beyond its designated time, nor due to the prohibition against partaking of the meat while tameh, ritually impure, again, because he's eating that which is normally not eaten. It's not considered legally for this situation eating. In the case of one who slaughters sacrificial female animals with the intent to eat the fetus of those animals or their placenta outside the designated area, he has not rendered the offering pigul. Likewise, in the case of one who pinches doves, right, the type of slaughter we do for doves, not the normal what we do for mammals, but malika, pinching the neck. So likewise, in the case of one who pinches doves with the intent to eat their eggs that are still in their bodies outside the designated area, he has not rendered the offering pigul. This is because the fetus, the placenta, and the eggs are not considered part of the body of the animal or the bird, right? Separate identity for not only the fetus, but for the placenta and for the eggs within the bird. For the same reason, one who consumes the milk of sacrificial female animals or the eggs of doves is not liable to receive charis for it, neither due to the prohibition of pigul, nor due to the prohibition of nasar, nor, which is eating it beyond its time in practice, not just intent at the outset, but at the end when it's already disqualified to eat it, that's nasar, nor due to the prohibition against partaking of the meat while tameh. That's the Mishnah. Now the Gemara. Rabbi Elazar says, if one renders an offering pigul by slaughtering it with the intent to partake of it, the normally eaten parts, beyond its designated time, its fetus is rendered pigul as well, and one who eats it is liable to receive charis. That seems to be the minority opinion of Rabbi Elazar, in contradiction to the majority opinion that we just read in the Mishnah. But if he intended to partake of the fetus beyond its designated time, the offering has not been rendered pigul. Likewise, if he rendered a bird pigul by having intent to partake of a tendon in the neck, which is edible, beyond its designated time, then the crop of the bird is rendered pigul as well, although it is not considered an item that is usually eaten, since there are people who eat it. But if he intended to partake of the crop beyond its designated time, the tendon in the neck is not rendered pigul. So it seems like you can render a portion of the animal pigul without rendering the entire animal pigul if it's a portion that is, can be rendered distinct from the rest of the animal. Not just specific, but distinct because it's not normally eaten. If he rendered the offering pigul, i.e. he had improper intent by intending to burn the sacrificial portions that are consumed on the altar beyond their designated time, right? An olah, a burnt offering, and he's intending to do the burning on the altar of the parts that, the whole animal, which goes up in a burnt offering, but to do it beyond the designated time, this also creates pigul. So if he rendered the offering pigul, he had improper intent by intending to burn the sacrificial portions that are consumed on the altar beyond their designated time, then the rest of the bulls are also rendered pigul. Right? So here we're talking about a sin offering where parts go up on the altar. He's intending to burn that beyond its designated time. Then the rest of the animal is also pigul. Therefore, if one partakes of their meat, he is liable to receive charis, death at the hands of the heavenly court, due to the prohibition of pigul. But if he intended to partake of the rest of the bulls beyond their designated time, since pigul does not apply to them, as they are not destined to be consumed on the altar nor to be eaten, the sacrificial portions that are consumed on the altar are not rendered pigul. And now the Gemara suggests, let us say that the following Baraisa supports the opinion of Rabbi Elazar. And even those who hold that pigul applies to the bulls that are burned agree that if he intended to partake of the bulls or to burn them beyond their designated time, he did not do anything. Why? This is because these bulls are not eaten nor burned on the altar, and intentions can render an offering pigul only in the cases of offerings that are either eaten or burned on the altar. And the Gemara infers, what? Is it not possible to infer that if he intended with regard to the sacrificial portions of the bulls that are consumed on the altar to burn them beyond their designated time, then the bulls are rendered pigul, which is in accordance with the statement of Rabbi Lazar? And the Gemara rejects this and says no. Derive instead as follows, but if he intended with regard to the sacrificial portions of the bulls to burn them beyond their designated time, the sacrificial portions themselves are rendered pigul, and one is liable to receive kares for eating them, but the flesh of the bulls is never rendered pigul. Which bulls are we talking about? The Gemara here is referring to the bulls that are burned, which are sin offerings whose blood is sprinkled on the inner altar. So what we thought. Okay. So now the Gemara suggests, come in here, a proof from a Mishna, tractate Me'ila 9a. We are on page 35b now. In the case of the bulls that are burned and the goats that are burned, one who derives benefit from them is liable for Me'ila, misuse of consecrated property, from the time that they were consecrated, right? From the time they're consecrated, you can't make any personal use of them, not before they're slaughtered and not after. Once they were slaughtered, they are susceptible to being rendered disqualified for sacrifice through contact with one who immersed that day, and through contact with one who has not yet brought an atonement offering, and through being left overnight without the requirements of the offering having been fulfilled. In other words, somebody who was involved, who was tameh, who is very far along in his purification process but has not completed it yet, since we're talking about offerings of the most sacred order, then even this person who's otherwise been purified, but he's still waiting for nightfall or still waiting to bring his atonement offerings, there's still a shred of impurity on him, and if he touches these offerings of the most sacred order, he can render them tameh, and therefore disqualified from having their blood conveyed to the altar and other matters done, even though it's after slaughter. So the Gemara derives what? Is it not referring to the flesh being left overnight, which would render it not valid, and conclude from the Mishna that since the flesh is rendered disqualified by being left overnight, the flesh is also rendered disqualified by the intention to burn the sacrificial portions the next day, i.e. it is subject to pigul, which is in accordance with the statement of Rabbi Lazar. And the Gemara responds, no. It is referring to leaving overnight the sacrificial portions of the offering, which needed to be eaten within time, and this would be after its time, not the flesh of the animal, which is not subject to be eaten as a sacrificial portion. Likewise, only the sacrificial portions are rendered pigul by intent to eat them after their designated time. And the Gemara asks, but from the fact that the latter clause teaches, one who derives benefit from all of them by the place of the ashes where they are burned is liable for misuse of consecrated property until the flesh is completely scorched, it may be inferred that the first clause of the Mishna is also referring to the flesh being left overnight. And the Gemara answers, are the cases comparable? This case is as it is, and that case is as it is. And the first clause is referring to the sacrificial portions that are consumed on the altar, and the latter clause is referring to the flesh. Rabbah raises an objection to the opinion of Rabbi Lazar from a Baraisa. And these are portions of the offering that do not render an offering pigul, and they do not become pigul, right? Again, pigul applies when? When at the time of slaughter, collecting the blood, conveying the blood, or sprinkling the blood, one has intent to eat the parts that are eaten beyond its designated time, or to burn the parts that are burned beyond their designated time. So it's the specific parts that are going to be eaten or are going to be burned, and you had intent about them. Therefore, if you had intent to eat parts that are not normally eaten or are not normally burned, that's not going to create pigul. Right? So these are the things that do not create pigul. The wool that is on the head of the lambs, the hair that is in the beard of the goats, the hide, the gravy, the spices that amass at the bottom of the pot together with small amounts of meat, a tendon in the neck, the crop, the bones, the tendons, the horns, the hooves, the fetus, the placenta, the milk of sacrificial animals, and the eggs of doves. Right? You shouldn't be eating those things. There could be me'ila, but having that intent does not create pigul. The Baraisa continues, all of these do not render other items pigul in the case of intent to consume them after their designated time, and they are not rendered pigul. And one is not liable to receive karis for them, neither due to the prohibition of pigul, nor the prohibition of nosar, nor the prohibition against partaking of the meat while tameh. And one who offers up one of these outside the temple is exempt, since they are not fit to be sacrificed on the altar. Right? So very interesting, if a person, decided to build his own altar and sacrifice a cat on it to God, right? So it's not avodah zarah, because he's doing it for God, not for some, fake God. Is he liable for, bringing a sacrifice, outside the place where sacrifices are brought? No, because what he's bringing as a sacrifice is not a sacrificial animal. So, he shouldn't have done what he did. He's violating some kind of a prohibition. But he's not violating the prohibitions of bringing offerings outside the place that God designated, because a cat is not an offering. He might think of it that way, but it's not an offering. So, like I said, he violated some laws for sure, but not the laws that we're talking about here. Rob explains, what? Does the Baraisa not mean that all of these items do not render the offering pigul if one intends to partake of them beyond the designated time, and they are also not rendered pigul due to the rest of the offering having been rendered pigul? This includes the fetus and the placenta, and is therefore not in accordance with the statement of Rabbi Elazar that the rest of the offering does not render them pigul. And the Gemara responds, no. It means that they do not render the offering pigul, and they are not rendered pigul due to themselves if one had intent to partake of them beyond the designated time. But such intent with regard to the offering, as opposed to these non-sacrificial parts of the offering. But if you had such an intent with respect to the offering generally, then you can render it pigul. And the Gemara asks, well, if so, concerning that which is taught in the latter clause, all of these do not render other items pigul, and they are not rendered pigul. Why do I also need this? Doesn't it teach that they are not rendered pigul due to the rest of the offering? And the Gemara answers, and according to your reasoning that the additional statement is necessary, then with regard to that which says a third time that one is not liable to receive karis for them due to the prohibition of pigul, why do I also need this? Haven't I already learned it? Rather, the third statement does not teach an additional law, but since the Tana wants to teach that one is not liable to receive karis due to violating the prohibition of nosar and the prohibition of partaking of the meat while tameh, he taught the law with regard to pigul as well. Here too, it can be explained similarly, since the Tana of our Mishna wants to teach the law that one who offers up one of these items outside the temple, which are not actual parts of offerings that are offered, and so if he takes it outside the temple, he's going to be exempt. One of these items outside the temple, he is exempt. So he also taught, and all of these do not render other items pigul, and they are not rendered pigul. It may be that the rest of the offering does in fact render them pigul, as Rabbi Elazar stated. So Rava says, we learned in accordance with the statement of Rabbi Elazar in the Mishnah as well. One who slaughters sacrificial female animals with the intent to eat the fetus of those animals or their placenta outside their designated area has not rendered the offering pigul. And one who pinches doves or with the intent to eat their eggs that are still in their bodies outside their designated area, he has not rendered the offering pigul, because what he did, though prohibited, is outside the scope of what actually renders something pigul. So rather, isn't it correct to conclude from the Mishnah that here they are rendered pigul due to the offering, and there due to themselves, i.e., if he had improper intent concerning these non-sacrificial portions, then they are not rendered pigul, and the Gemara affirms, conclude from the Mishnah that it is so, right? Whereas having intent about, parts that would normally be eaten, and you're going to eat them beyond its time, now you're going to render the whole offering pigul. Therefore, even these normally non-edible portions are also pigul. That's just being part of the animal. But if your intent is with respect to the non-sacrificial portions to eat that, that's not going to render the rest of the offering pigul. Okay, new subject. The Baraisa cited by Rob is now discussed in a different context. We learned in a Mishna there on page 84a that if disqualified offerings are nevertheless brought upon the altar, they are removed, and blemished animals are also included in this law. Rabbi Akiva deems blemished animals fit, and they were brought upon the altar, and if they were brought up upon the altar, they are not removed, right? So this animal that's blemished should not have been placed on the altar. It was blemished, it was unfit to be brought. But now that it was put on the altar, do we take it down? In matters of holiness, we ascend, we don't descend. So is the blemish or is the disqualification sufficiently problematic that this animal that was placed on the altar, we should pull it off, right? And, we're going to keep in mind that we have the tzitz that atones for certain inappropriate offerings being brought and being sprinkled, their blood sprinkled and placed on the altar. But usually that has to do with tuma, not blemishes. So Rabbi Chia Bar Abba says that Rabbi Yochanan says Rabbi Akiva deemed fit only an animal with a blemish on the cornea of the eye and similar blemishes that are not noticeable, since they are valid in the case of birds. And in addition, this is the law provided that its consecration preceded its blemish, i.e. when the animal was consecrated, it was fit. But if it was already unfit when they consecrated it, even Rabbi Akiva would agree that, okay, you put it on the altar, you shouldn't have done that, and now we can catch it before it's consumed by the altar, we take it off. Rabbi Chia Bar Abba says, and Rabbi Akiva concedes with regard to a female burnt offering that was brought upon the altar, that since a burnt offering may be only a male animal, it is comparable to a case where its blemish preceded its consecration, since the disqualifying factor was there from the outset. And Ola should only be a male animal. Since you used a female animal, this was already a flawed offering from the get-go. And so what you did is ineffective. And if we can save it, before it's consumed by the altar, we will. Therefore, if it was brought upon the altar, it must be removed. Rabbi Zera raised an objection to this from the Baraisa cited by Rabbah. One who offers up one of these outside the temple is exempt, as they are not fit to be sacrificed on the altar. But it can be inferred that if he were to sacrifice from the flesh of the mother of one of these outside the temple, he would be liable. And how can you find these circumstances? It is only the case of a female burnt offering. This is because with regard to the peace offering, which may be a female animal, its flesh is not burned on the altar, but it is eaten. Therefore, there would be no liability for sacrificing it outside the temple. Rabbi Zera explains his objection. So granted, if you say that Rabbi Akiva holds with regard to a female burnt offering that if it ascended onto the altar, it does not descend, in accordance with whose opinion is this? Rabbi Akiva. This is because one is liable for sacrificing any offering outside the temple that may be sacrificed on the altar, including one that was brought upon the altar inappropriately but not removed. But if you say that with regard to a female burnt offering, right, which never should have happened, if it ascended the altar, it must descend, and it entirely lacks the status of an offering fit to be sacrificed on the altar, then in accordance with whose opinion is this Baraisa? And the Gemara answers say that the inference should be like this. One who offers up one of those items outside the temple is exempt, but if he sacrificed from the sacrificial portions of the mother of one of these, he is liable. This law can apply to both the sin offering and a peace offering for which a female may be brought, and whose sacrificial portions are burned on the altar. And the Gemara challenges this, says, but the Baraisa teaches this law with the term one of these, indicating that it is referring to one who sacrifices the flesh and not the sacrificial portions alone. And the case of their mother is similar to that of them, and is therefore referring to sacrificing the flesh of the mother outside the temple, not to the sacrificial portions which could have gone on the altar. So rather say as follows: one who offers up part of their sacrificial portions outside the temple is exempt, but one who offered up some of the sacrificial portions of the mother of one of these is liable. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 2 here in chapter 3. Now the final Mishnah of our chapter, Mishnah 3. If one slaughters the animal in order to leave its blood or its sacrificial portions for the next day, or to remove them outside the designated area, but not in order to sacrifice them the next day. Rabbi Yehuda deems the offering unfit, and the rabbis deem it fit. Right? So let's just say that again. You're slaughtering. We're at the port. Where are we in the offering procedure? Slaughter. And he has in mind that he's going to leave its blood or sacrificial portions for the next day. Right? The blood should be sprinkled the same day. The sacrificial portions that are either eaten or burned need to be eaten or burned the same day. So he's not having an intent to consume meat beyond its time, but he's having intent to finish the procedure of bringing the offering beyond its time. So that's not pigul, that's something else. And so Rabbi Yehuda would deem the offering unfit because it all should be finished the same day, but the rabbis deem it fit. Having that intention at the time of slaughter is not going to render the offering unfit already. In the case of one who slaughters the animal in order to place the blood upon the ramp or on the wall of the altar that is not opposite the base of the altar, or in order to place the blood that is to be placed above the red line, below the red line, or to place the blood that is supposed to be placed below the red line, above the red line, or the blood that is to be placed inside the sanctuary, outside the sanctuary, meaning, Yom Kippur offerings he's going to sprinkle on the outer altar, or regular offerings he's going to sprinkle on the inner, inside the sanctuary, like only Yom Kippur offerings are. Again, these are all errors, right? These are all errors. And the question is, will these errors render the offering unfit? So he has intent to do the offering procedure wrong at the time that he's slaughtering. Will that render it unfit? And likewise, if he slaughtered the animal with the intent that Tameh people will partake of it, or that Tameh people will sacrifice it, or that uncircumcised people will partake of it, or that uncircumcised people will sacrifice it. And likewise, with regard to the Pesach, the Passover offering, if he had intent during the slaughter to break the bones of the Pesach, which cannot be done, or to eat from the meat of the Pesach partially roasted, or to mix the blood of an offering with the blood of unfit offerings, in all these cases, although he intended to perform one of these prohibited acts, some of which would render the offering unfit once they happen, the offering is fit because having that intent at the time of slaughter doesn't render the offering unfit. What kind of intents render the offering unfit? Intent for the wrong kind of offering altogether. We learned that in chapter 1. Or intent to eat of it beyond its time, or to eat of it outside its place. That could render it unfit. But having an intent to mess up the procedure doesn't render the offer at the time of slaughter, doesn't render the offering unfit, because he might correct it and do the procedure right. If he actually does mess up the procedure along these lines, most of these cases, the offering would then be rendered unfit. But such an intent at the time of slaughter does not. And the reason is that intent does not render the offering unfit, except in cases of intent to eat or burn the offering beyond its designated time and outside its designated area. And in addition, the Pesach and the sin offerings are disqualified by intent to sacrifice them not for their sake. All these other errors don't disqualify through intention alone. That's the Mishnah. Now the Gemara. The Gemara asks, what is the reasoning of Rabbi Yehuda, who deems the offering unfit if there was intent to leave it over until the next day or to take it out of its designated area? Rabbi Elazar said there are two verses that were written with regard to Nasar. One verse states, you shall let nothing of it remain until the morning, and that which remains of it until the morning you shall burn with fire. That's Exodus 12:10. And the other verse is Leviticus 7:15, where it says, he shall not leave any of it until the morning. So if the additional, so it's redundant. So why is there an extra verse telling us the same information? And the Gemara is going to answer that. So if the additional verse is not necessary for the matter of the prohibition against leaving it overnight, which is already mentioned by the first verse, so we apply the second verse to the matter of intent of leaving it overnight, which would therefore be prohibited as well. That is per the reasoning of Rabbi Yehuda, but the majority don't subscribe to that. So the Gemara asks, But according to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, does this verse come to teach this idea? This verse is necessary for him to derive that which is taught in a different place, in a baraisa, where the verse states, and the flesh of the sacrifice of his peace offerings for thanksgiving shall be eaten on the day of his offering. He shall not leave any of it until the morning. That's Leviticus 7:15. And from the words, and the flesh of the sacrifice of his peace offerings for thanksgiving, we learn with regard to a thanks offering that it is eaten for a day and a night, not to disqualify these other kinds of offerings. So with regard to animals that were exchanged for thanks offerings and the offspring of thanks offerings and the substitutes of thanks offerings, from where is it derived that they too are eaten only for a day and a night? The verse states, and the flesh, uve asar, and the additional and, right? You can add a vav at the beginning of the word to add the conjunction and, right? So that it adds additional meaning. And that includes these other situations. With regard to a sin offering and a guilt offering, from where is it derived that they are eaten for only a day and a night? The verse states sacrifice to include other types of offerings. The Baraisa continues, and from where is it derived to include the peace offering of a Nazir, i.e. the ram that a Nazir brings at the close of his term of Naziris when he vowed not to partake of the grapevine or to cut his hair or to become impure for the dead. And then at the end of that, he has to bring a bunch of offerings to be purified from his Naziris. So it says, and from where is it derived to include the peace offering of a Nazir and the peace offering of Pesach? The verse therefore states his peace offerings in the plural. With regard to the loaves of the thanks offering and the loaves and wafers that are part of the offering brought by a Nazir, from where is it derived that they are eaten only for a day and a night? The verse states his offering. With regard to all of them, and I will read the phrase, he shall not leave any of it until morning, as being applicable to all the parts and all the associated ancillary portions that come with it. Evidently, this verse is necessary to teach numerous laws concerning the allotted time to partake of offerings. So how could Rabbi Yehuda use that verse to ascribe the same disqualification for intent as he would to the actual making these mistakes? Or violating these prohibitions? So the Gemara answers, well, if so, let the verse state, then you shall let nothing of it remain until morning, as stated in the other verse. What is indicated by the phrase, he shall not leave any of it, if it is not necessary for the matter of the prohibition against leaving it overnight, apply to the matter of intent to leave it overnight. Now the Gemara questions the source that was cited by Rabbi Elazar. This works out well to explain the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda with regard to one who had intent to leave the sacrificial portions overnight. But with regard to disqualifying the offering due to one who had intent to remove them from the temple altogether, what can be said to explain the source of Rabbi Yehuda, as it cannot be derived from these verses? The verses we're talking about leaving it overnight. Now he's talking about outside of place. How can we learn that? And furthermore, the statement of Rabbi Elazar can be questioned as the rationale of Rabbi Yehuda is based on logical reasoning, not derivation from a verse. And this is as it is taught in Baraisa. Rabbi Yehuda said to the rabbis, do you not concede that if he left it over until the next day, that it is disqualified? So too, if he intended to leave it over until the next day, it is disqualified. Right? If he left it over, it's disqualified. Therefore, intent to leave it over should also disqualify. So clearly, Rabbi Yehuda bases his opinion on logical reasoning, as he equates intent with action. So the Gemara asks, rather, is the rationale of Rabbi Yehuda based on logical reasoning and not from the verse? But if so, Rabbi Yehuda should also disagree with regard to all of the other cases in the Mishnah due to the same reasoning. But the Gemara rejects this idea, saying, with regard to which case should Rabbi Yehuda disagree? Should he disagree with regard to one who slaughters the offering with intent to break the bones of the Pesach, or with intent to partake of the Pesach while it is only partially roasted, as opposed to wholly roasted, which is the requirement? Even had he actually realized such intent, not just intent, but done it, would the offering itself thereby be disqualified? It presumably would not, as the presenting of the blood affects acceptance. Maybe you can't eat it, but the blood was already presented, so you achieve the atonement, or you achieve fulfilling your obligation. Likewise, if a rite was performed on the condition that ritually impure individuals will partake of it, or that ritually impure individuals will sacrifice it, i.e. burn the sacrificial portions on the altar, would the offering itself be disqualified if such actions occurred? That all these actions happen, right? Eating happens after the sprinkling. Once the sprinkling was done, you can't render the offering unfit. It already achieved its purpose. Maybe you can't burn it. Maybe you can't eat it, but it's too late to render it unfit. You're just prohibited from eating it. Likewise, if it was done with intent that uncircumcised individuals will partake of it or that uncircumcised individuals will sacrifice it, would the offering itself be disqualified if this actually occurred? The Gemara presents another version of this question. Is it in his power to execute these actions that are contingent on the will of others, right? Intent that an impure person will do some part of the process. Well, that's not in his power. He's got to, then have some impure person come and do it. How does he know that's going to be possible? Where's an impure person going to appear on the Temple Mount to do that? With regard to a case where one had intent to mix their blood with the blood of unfit offerings, where Rabbi Yehuda also does not disagree with the ruling of the Mishna that the offering is valid, he conforms to his line of reasoning, as he says, blood does not nullify blood. Therefore, even if one would actually mix the two types of blood, it would not be disqualified. And likewise, in cases where one had intent to place the blood that is to be placed above the red line, and he places it below the red line, or he has intent that bloods that are supposed to be placed below the red line, he's going to put them above the red line. Rabbi Yehuda conforms to his line of reasoning, as he says, blood that was not placed in its proper place on the altar is also considered to be blood that was placed on the altar, and therefore it affects acceptance of the offering, even though it was not on the right part of the altar. The Gemara, it wasn't done right ab initio, but after the fact, it achieves the atonement. So the Gemara suggests, and let him disagree with regard to a case of blood that is to be placed inside the sanctuary, Yom Kippur offerings, but that blood was instead placed outside, and blood that was supposed to be placed outside, regular offerings, and its blood was sprinkled inside the sanctuary, where only Yom Kippur offerings go. So that's the error that was made. And these are disqualified. So the Gemara explains, Rabbi Yehuda holds that in order to disqualify an offering with intent to perform one of the rites outside its designated area, we require that the intended place have threefold functionality, i.e., for presenting of the blood, for the eating of the meat, and for the burning of the sacrificial portions on the altar. And this is true only of the area that is outside the temple courtyard, which was valid for these activities during an era in which it was permitted to sacrifice offerings on private altars, right? There were these short periods of Jewish history between the tabernacle and the temple, and before the tabernacle went up, there were brief periods when individuals could build their own altars. And so these things could happen there. But once the temple is standing, no. And after the second temple was destroyed, also no, because we don't bring offerings anymore at all. During the area in which it was permitted to sacrifice offerings on private altars. Therefore, intent to present the blood in the sanctuary, which lacks these three elements, does not disqualify the offering, as the meat and sacrificial portions are never eaten or burned there. Since it's something that's never done there, it's like a non-action when you intend to do that. Now, the Gemara asks, and does Rabbi Yehuda accept this reasoning that it must be a place of this so-called threefold functionality? But isn't it taught in a Baraisa that Rabbi Yehuda says that the verse states, you shall not sacrifice to the Lord your God an ox or a sheep that has a blemish, even any evil thing, Deuteronomy 17:1. So the verse includes here a sin offering that one slaughtered in the south and not in the northern side of the temple as required. And likewise a sin offering whose blood entered inside, i.e. was slaughtered with the intent that its blood should be brought inside the sanctuary, that they are disqualified. So this indicates that an offering slaughtered with improper intent with regard to a place that lacks this threefold functionality nevertheless renders the offering invalid. The Gemara responds to this challenge by saying, and does Rabbi Yehuda not accept the requirement of a place of three functions? But didn't we learn in a Mishna on page 82a that Rabbi Yehuda said, if he brought the blood into the sanctuary unwittingly, the blood remains fit for presenting, from which it may be inferred. But if he brought it in intentionally, it becomes unfit. And we maintain that Rabbi Yehuda deems it unfit only where one actually effected atonement, i.e. he presented the blood on the inner altar, not just intent. Now, it stands to reason that if there, where one actually brought the blood inside, only if he effected atonement, yes, it is unfit. But if he did not effect atonement, it is not unfit. You can walk inside the sanctuary with the blood as long as you don't sprinkle it on the curtain or the inner altar. It's like you can still return it outside. So then here, where he merely thought to bring it inside, all the more so is it not clear that their offering should remain valid. And the Gemara answers, there are two Tanaim, sages of the Mishna, and they disagree with regard to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda concerning a place with this threefold functionality. So the Gemara asks, and does Rabbi Yehuda hold that with regard to a sin offering that one slaughtered in the south, the incorrect place, the slaughterer would be liable to receive lashes? Now we're on 36b. But isn't it taught in a Baraisa that Rabbi Yehuda says one might have thought that with regard to a sin offering that one slaughtered in the south, he would be liable for it. Therefore, the verse states, you shall not sacrifice to the Lord your God an ox, a sheep, or a sheep that has a blemish, even any evil thing. And this is to teach you that for slaughtering an evil thing, such as a blemished offering, you deem him liable to receive lashes. But you do not deem him liable for a sin offering that he slaughtered in the incorrect portion of the courtyard. And the Gemara answers here too. There are two Tanaim, and they disagree with regard to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. That's why we are unable to reconcile the contradiction until now. New topic. Rabbi Abba says, although Rabbi Yehuda says that an offering is rendered not valid if it was slaughtered with the intent that its blood would be left over until the next day, Rabbi Yehuda concedes that if the priest subsequently collected, conveyed, or presented the blood with the intent to sacrifice or partake of the offering beyond its designated time, he then has established the offering as pigul. Right? So intent about the blood as opposed to the eating doesn't create pigul, but intent coupled with then doing it in the wrong way has now rendered the offering pigul, and therefore you can't eat of it, and if you did, karas. The intent to leave it overnight does not prevent it from being rendered pigul, in contrast to intent to sacrifice or partake of it outside its designated area, or performing a sacrificial rite of the Pesach or a sin offering not for its own sake, which do prevent the offering from subsequently being rendered pigul. Those kinds of mistaken intent disqualify the offering altogether. Therefore, pigul has been taken off the table. Rava says, no, that this is so as intent to sprinkle the blood the next day, which does render an offering pigul, and which inherently includes the intent to leave blood over until the next day so that he can then sprinkle it, is nothing before the sprinkling of the blood. And his intent during the slaughter to sprinkle the blood the next day does not render the offering pigul until the blood is actually sprinkled. And then the sprinkling of the blood comes and establishes the offering as pigul because he has intent during the sprinkling to eat beyond the designated time. So you can still create pigul during the sprinkling. Rav Huna raised an objection to Rabbi Abba from a Baraisa. If one slaughtered an offering with the intent to place the blood that is to be placed above the red line below the line, or to sprinkle blood that was supposed to be below the red line above the red line, and he had intent to do so immediately, i.e. on the same day, then it is valid, as such intent does not disqualify the offering, because we said even though it's sprinkled on the wrong part of the altar, it's still sprinkling. If he then had intent to sacrifice the offering outside its designated area, it is disqualified, but there's no liability to receive karis if you eat it. And if he had intent to sacrifice it beyond its designated time, then we can still have pigul, and then if one ate of it, he would receive karis. So the Baraisa continues, if one had intent to place the blood that is to be placed above the red line below, or vice versa the next day, then it is disqualified due to his intent to leave it overnight in accordance with the statement of Rabbi Yehuda. In this case, if he then had intent to sacrifice the same offering either beyond its time or outside its place, 2 mistakes, sprinkling in the wrong place, and beyond its time. Then it is disqualified, but there's no chorus, therefore not pigul. So evidently intent to leave it overnight prevents the offering from subsequently being rendered pigul. And the Gemara concludes, yes, the refutation of the opinion of Rabbi Abba is indeed a conclusive refutation. New topic, Rav Chisda says that Ravina Bar Silla says, if one slaughtered an offering with intent that impure individuals would eat the meat of the offering the next day, one is liable to receive kares due to the prohibition of pigul, right? So if he was intending at the time of slaughter to eat it beyond its time, that's classic pigul. So now the only variation is not introducing, other mistakes along the way, but rather that at the time he's intending that it be eaten beyond its time. What he's intending is that a tameh individual will eat it. Okay, so if it's a sacrificial portion, that can't be eaten by a tameh person. So he's compounding the error, but he's only talking about eating beyond its time. And what he's adding is that the one who will eat is tameh. So does pigul still apply? Right, so Rav Chisda says that Ravina Bar Sila says, if one slaughtered an offering with intent that impure individuals would eat the meat of the offering the next day, then one is liable to receive kares if he ate that meat. So therefore, pigul took hold. Although impure individuals are not fit to partake of the meat, this is nevertheless considered intent to partake of it beyond its designated time. Eating by an impure person, prohibited, but still constitutes eating. Rava says, no, that this is so, as meat prior to the sprinkling of the blood is not fit to be eaten. And when one has improper intent with regard to it, it is disqualified. So clearly, intent to partake of a forbidden item beyond its designated time renders the offering pigul, no matter who's eating it. Now, the Gemara rejects Rava's proof, but it is not so. As there, with regard to a standard pigul intent, he sprinkles the blood and the meat is rendered fit to be eaten the next day. By contrast, here, it is not rendered fit to be eaten by impure individuals at all. Therefore, such intent is not considered significant intent to consume the meat after its designated time, and therefore pigul would not take hold, according to this analysis. I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. Rav Chisda says that Rav Dimi Bar Chanana was wont to say the following law. With regard to the meat of the Pesach, that was not roasted, and the loaves of a thanks offering from which the priest's portion was not separated, although it is prohibited for these things to be eaten, nevertheless, one is liable to receive kares due to violating the prohibition against eating them in a state of impurity. He shouldn't be eating them, but if he does eat them, and he's tameh, that punishment will take hold, because you can't eat of a Pesach while tameh, even though you're eating a Pesach that was improperly cooked. Rava said, no, that this is so, as it is taught in a Baraisa. The verse states, but the soul that eats of the flesh of the sacrifice of peace offerings that pertain to the Lord, having his impurity upon him, that soul shall be cut off from his people, right? Offerings that are eaten cannot be eaten by tameh people. So the added words that pertain to the Lord serve to include the sacrificial portions of offerings of lesser sanctity with regard to tuma, teaching that one who partakes of them while impure is liable to receive kares, even if they were improperly cooked. Apparently, even though they are not fit for consumption because they weren't cooked properly, one is liable to receive kares due to violating the prohibition against eating them in a state of tuma. So here too, with regard to the meat of a Pesach that was not roasted and the loaves of a thanks offering from which the priest's portion was not separated, even though they are not fit to be eaten, one is liable to receive kares due to violating the prohibition against eating them during a state of tuma. Now the Gemara rejects Rava's proof, but it is not so. As there, the sacrificial portions of offerings of lesser sanctity that are burned on the altar are at least fit for the Most High, i.e. for the consumption on the altar, and therefore one is liable to receive kares for eating them while tameh. He shouldn't be eating them, but they're still valid. This is to the exclusion of the meat of a Pesach that was not roasted and the loaves of a thanks offering from which the priest's portion was not separated, which are not fit, not for the Most High and not for an ordinary person. So the Gemara presents another version of the proof and its rejection, but the sacrificial portions are not fit, and yet one is liable if he consumes them while impure. But the Gemara responds, no, it is not so, since these sacrificial portions are fit for other matters, and these, the meat of a Pesach that was not roasted, or the loaves of thanks offerings from which the priest's portion was not separated, are not fit for anything at all, and therefore if one did eat of them, kares would not apply. And that concludes our discussion of Mishna number 3 in chapter 3, and with it, chapter 3. We will continue with chapter 4 tomorrow at the regular Tuesday time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Anybody who's interested, I'll be speaking at, I think, 6:30 Eastern, 3:30 Pacific. In Scholars Circle, and we posted that. It should be a really interesting interview, and you have to register for it if you want to be on that Zoom, and we posted that on the Facebook page, but that should not interfere with our class tomorrow at 6 p.m. Pacific, and I'm seeing no questions, therefore, that's it. All the best, my holy sisters and brothers, and God willing, see you tomorrow, Tuesday, regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Nina says, absolutely no questions or comments. Our brains hurt. Okay. All the best.